Welcome back to just another solar podcast with Luke Beattie. That's me and Karl Jensen. G'day, Karl.
How you going, Luke?
Good, thank you. Today we're joined by James Taylor from Taylor Energy in sunny Queensland. How are you, James?
Good, thanks, Luke. How are you?
Good. So I did the 5-minute Google on the business and on yourself. I feel that most of what I know from you, I've learned from Snapchat in the Cutters Gainers group. And it's not all work related, but it's interesting. My understanding is that you have your solar business. You also act as a contractor for a lot of other companies as well. And you've been involved in a lot of interesting projects. Do you want to just give us a quick summary of how you've gotten here?
Yeah, I got into solar, started the business in 2009. So I was one of the real early guys into the Queensland scene anyway. Started just contracting for a couple of companies, doing installs. I refer to those as the glory days when we were getting massive dollars because no one else was doing it. And then it's sort of just, everyone's doing it now. Since then, we used to do a lot of contracting, residential, that kind of thing. It's grown to a point where I've got 14 full-time electricians now, 8 vehicles on the road, operation staff and everything. Mainly do commercial. 90% of our business is commercial now. So we don't do much less than 100 kilowatts. Do a few interesting things like resis if they fall in our lap, but don't do any resi contracting or anything. We do the installations for RACV, Gem Energy. Heaps of the big players use us to do their Queensland stuff. I've done heaps of really interesting projects for those guys. And I do sell quite a bit of commercial myself, mainly in new construction. We have a really great culture. All the guys are really friendly. We have a beer on a Friday afternoon. Everyone's friendly with each other. We hang out on weekends. I think culture is the most important thing.
How long did it take you to build that culture?
Well, I think the key to it was growing it organically. So I started with one first-year apprentice and me. He came through to a tradesman. We then hired his little brother, put him through his trade. We hired another apprentice, put him through his trade. I think I've only ever lost 2 employees ever. So we've just organically grown. That first apprentice I put on in 2009, he's now my operations manager in the office. So he's been with me for 13 years.
Wow, that's lucky. I'm guessing he's one of your best mates too.
Yeah, sure is. I mean, you look after your staff, you pay them properly, you treat them well and listen to them and talk to them and find out what the problems are and solve the problems, and you build a good culture.
Before we jumped on and pressed record here, we were discussing a 600 kilowatt install that you're currently doing now, according to the new AS5033, which will be rolling as mandatory across the country on the 19th of May. So what are some of the learnings that you've made from that?
The first major stepping stone, like the big hurdle we came across, was the earthing regulation. I'm not really sure the background on it, but basically as the rule stands, you need to match the earthing conductor to the array to the size of the earthing conductor to the inverter. For us in large scale installations, using 100 kilowatt, 110 kilowatt Sungrow is probably our go-to inverter, which has either a 25 or a 35 mil earth to it. So as the rule stands, we would have to run a 35 mil earth to every single panel on the array, which is obviously just completely impractical. No one could do that. There's not even, earthing lugs and things that could accommodate that. It's not possible. So the way that we got around it is string fusing. Every single string cable that goes from the inverter has got to plug in MC4 string fuse at the inverter. And then the regulation says that we need to match the earth cable to the size of the DC conductor. So we used a 10 mil DC cable to some of the longer arrays. Basically, the whole array has 10 mil to it. Every single rail, everything has 10 mil to it, which even in itself was pretty challenging. 10 mil is not easy to work with, it's 4, but that was a big one. Getting rid of the isolators is just great. I've been around long enough to have seen the first 3 or 4 years, 5 years even, of my installs. We never had isolators, never had a problem, never had a fire. And then I've been through all of the leaky isolators, all the crap, replacing burnt isolators, that kind of thing. So, the disconnection point thing I think is a great idea. I really love the standard across the board, actually, except for that earthing thing. I really love the new standard. I think it's great. It's what everyone's been crying out for as installers for a long time now. I'm glad someone's finally seen some sense.
And yet there's still pushback. Some people saying that it's even harder and we're not interested in using the new standard. Obviously, they're not going to have a choice in another couple of months. But I find that baffling that I'm hearing from someone like yourself who runs a dozen teams of guys that it's a winner, and yet people still pushing back.
People push back on everything. Do you remember when we used to run cable straight through the roof, smashing it through the roof, and then we had to put cable in conduit, and it's like the end of the world for everyone. Oh, quitting solar, it's too hard, that's ridiculous. And now it's second nature for everyone to run conduit through the ceiling. That's just how it is. And people will adapt to the new rules, and people will see it for what it is. Having a DC isolator on the roof, to me, has always been the most ridiculous thing ever. They catch on fire, they fill up with water. You don't put plastic on a roof for 10, 20 years. If I could avoid any plastic on the roof, I would, and try to.
And what about from a cost comparison? You're swapping out the DC ISOs, you've got string fusing, you've got larger earth. What do you think the price difference is? Is it equivalent? Is it more to adhere to it?
I think on a 600 kilowatt installation, it probably breaks even. You take out the cost of isolators and isolator shields. You add a different sticker kit. Like the string fuse is probably the same cost as the isolator, so it probably breaks even. The 10 mil earth is obviously more costly than 4 mil, but for me, it's more about the long-term servicing and things. Like what it's going to cost me. I plan on being here in 10 years, and what it's going to cost me for the next 10 years to go back and check those DC isolators every year, replace them when they fail. Now I'm just content. I've got a beautiful plan of the thing with all the disconnection points. You can work out how to do it. Servicing is easier. Long-term longevity is better. And for me, it's just a win-win, except for that annoying earthing thing.
So do you think that was actually just a mistake?
I don't think it was given enough thought. I think it was basically to stop people running a 6 mil twin and earth to a Fronius and tapping off the 2.5 with their 4 mil and running the 4 mil up to the earth. I think that's where they thought, they should be running 4 mil the whole way back to the switchboard. I don't think anyone, when writing the rule, thought, hey, some people use 100 kilowatt inverters with 35 mil earth. Typically of these things, practicality doesn't seem to come into it.
That might explain why we're selling lots of 30s and 50s.
I'd still use a SunGrow 110 well and beyond any other inverter on a 100 kilowatt install.
I had another interesting call today. So this was from a guy who had a system installed around 10 years ago. So had 250 watt panels, and he was looking for a replacement panel. I said, okay, do you have someone to swap it over? No, I'll do it myself. I'm a roofer. I said, okay, well, tell me more about how did you determine there's something wrong? And he said, I thought there was something wrong. I climbed on the roof. I got the rattle gun and pulled a couple of panels off, and one of them had burn marks and looked like it was smoking. I said, very interesting. Did you isolate the system? Did you flick any switches off? No, I was just going to have a look. Have you heard similar things? Backyard guys doing their solar?
Oh, absolutely. The amount of calls I've had, just saying, look, can you guys come and install the system? Look, I've already installed it. I just need you to hook it up. It's like, excuse me. Like, I know I've already put all the panels up and everything. I just need someone to sign off on it. I'm like, well, call someone else, mate. It's not going to be me. Like, I've had that call 50 times. I think people, because, I've got solar panels on my caravan, I've got them on my boat, that kind of thing, when they're talking 12 volt setups, they think, same thing, but it's not.
Give you a much bigger boot if something goes wrong.
Yeah, not even that, like just the risk of fire. Like, I remember a silly mistake I made years and years ago. One of the guys had plugged the strings together up on the roof, and it was like a commercial system, and the cable was just hanging down, and it ended up going to the side of a tin shed, and it just turned into an arc welder. I was trying to pull the cable, it was just fire pouring out the end of the cable, and it was just, it was basically an arc welder, 1,000-volt arc welder, just fire coming out the end of the cable. It was terrifying, and it's a mistake you never make again.
My favourite's the two strings of 22 panels. Unfortunately, instead of being connected in parallel, connected in a loop, that makes a pretty decent spark, a 44 panel string.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's happened to a few people over the years.
Even I look back at, the installs I did in 2009, 2010, 11, and I think, oh God, some of the stuff we used to do, like for what now, like it was new to everyone back then. Doing 5 kilowatts, we were doing 2 or 3 5 kilowatt systems in a day. Just me and one guy. You didn't have to do conduit through the roof. You didn't do anything like that. And I go back now and think, geez, I wish I could go back and fix a few of those up. But,
yep.
It was just a whole different world back then.
That's right. And you mentioned that it's a good thing with the new AS5033 because you think the last amendment was 2014. You think how far install standards have come since then.
Yeah. I'm very disappointed that there's still things that are contradicting each other, though, like the 1,000-volt residential rule, for example. That's just really annoying. It's like, well, you still have to stay under 600 because it contradicts this other rule in this other book. And it's like, well, how has this not been thought through properly? I mean, 1,000 volts on residential systems would just make life so much easier, especially for three-phase systems, just in, design flexibility, big, long strings, instead of having to parallel several times on the roof and that kind of thing. It's just more problems, higher current. It's the last thing you want.
Not to mention my system, I designed it as a 24-panel string. That would have been a winner, but ends up as 2 strings of 12, which is a disaster.
It's just a waste. It's silly rules that, what's the difference between 601 volts and 690 and 900, or, 599 is fine, but 601 is non-compliant. What's the difference?
Yeah, look, I really like Fronius's white paper for that, to use 10 degrees, because the whole 0 degrees thing doesn't actually pan out in real life. That document, can't see why you can't use it for any other inverter manufacturer or your cable derating or any of that stuff. So essentially pick up at least another panel.
Yeah, well, Fronius have always put common sense white papers out. They were the first one to put a white paper out on paralleling on a single tracker east-west. It's like, that's something that we do every day. And it's just common sense. But I remember maybe even 4 or 5 years ago, people were like, oh, you need 2 trackers to go east-west. And they'd argue it black and blue. And then you're like, all right, well, let's do an example. Show me the performance difference. And trying to just bring a white paper out, and it's done. It's sorted. Now everyone does it.
I did it, 8 years ago on my place, Luke? 3 strings of 8, 8 north, 8 east, 8 west, all on a CMS 2000. Went great.
Yep.
CMS 2000. That's a blast from the past. I installed thousands of those things.
Yeah.
There's still a few kicking around, though.
Look, I've still got 2 of them. Yeah. Still got 2 of them at the family farm running.
I reckon I've installed every inverter known to man. Jinlong, Olamaya, all these weird, crazy brands that came out. CMS, Clenergy or Conergy.
As a business owner and someone running a fleet of trucks, the fuel cost and increase in diesel costs would be having an impact, and that's something I'm getting feedback about every day. That's something we're all familiar with. One of the other things I Googled this week was the aluminium price. The increase this year has been 66%. Back in October, we did a podcast, and the prediction was if it continued as we saw it continuing, with no foresight for the war in Ukraine, that racking prices may be going up 30 to 40%.
Hang on, Luke. We should start calling you the Oracle.
All the indications were there, and I don't think all of the manufacturers and all of the stocking market has gone there, but the feedback from further up the chain is that no one's going to be able to hold the old price in for racking as one component. Now, James, you were mentioning things like cable tray as well and the increase in cost. What's it look like for a commercial installer?
Basically everything, Luke, everything across the board. DC cable. I had a really fair conversation with Jack from Gem Energy around commercial install pricing prior to this 600 kilowatt system I was talking about before. And I sort of just laid out a spreadsheet for him in Excel and said, look, Jack, this is what I was paying for 10 different components of cable tray and 10 different sizes of cable and a few other things, just as a bit of a worked example. Some cable tray was up to 55%. And I'm talking from this time last year, 55% increase in cable tray. And cable tray on a big job like that is, 30 grand. So that's a massive increase in cost. And it's 15 grand there just in tray. And then DC cables come up about 30% as well. And, this job's, I think I had $45,000 worth of DC cable in it. So it's a huge cost. And then I've started using aluminium cable for my submains just to try and cut the copper price out of it, because copper's just through the roof as well. I get an email every week from my wholesaler. Cable prices are going up 5% next month. Get your orders in now. That's going to be up 5%. I've had that email for the last 6 months now.
Every week the cost of cable goes up another 5%. No worries.
Yeah, well, that's what it is, though. I mean, we're sort of slaves to the market. We have to pay it. You need cable. I've got shitloads of it on the shelf. I was lucky enough to be tipped off a fair bit about the panel prices coming in last year, and I bought up a heap of stock, which was a good move for me as a business. But it also left me well short on cash flow. So, I mean, you've got to meet the market somewhere. And To answer your question though, commercial pricing, I've had to put my commercial installation costs up by about 5 cents a watt. And that's just to cover material costs, and it's no extra profit for me, and I can assure you that.
Definitely significant when, install rate arguably been around that 30 cents a watt mark for a small commercial. Obviously, as it gets bigger, those costs go up. They don't go down.
Yeah.
I think a lot of little guys don't actually realise, once you get above, say, 20, 30 kilowatt domestic size or large domestic job, that the costs get bigger, not smaller.
Some retailers don't seem to get that though. But I'm giving you a 600. Surely you can drop your rate down to about 26. I'm like, oh, okay, mate. Well, the cables are bigger, the runs are longer, there's more racking, there's more labour. Where's the big saving here?
So, James, has anyone started looking at alternative materials, perhaps recycled plastic tray? Is that something that's a possibility for the industry to look at?
We're using a lot of sunlock channel where we can. That stuff's brilliant. I hadn't used sunlock for a long time, and now I try and use it on commercial as my preferred racking. And it's just to cut down on tray price, pretty much. I mean, it's great stuff. It's good to install, but I mean, you can run, 8 or 10 cables in sunlock channel, put a lid on top.
Yeah.
There's no swarf on the roof. There's no risk of rust. It's heaps cheaper per meter. So where we can, we'll try and save a bit by using that, especially just little runs. Instead of running a tray an extra 100 meters, it's only got one cable in it. You run your sunlock channel and it's, half the cost. So alternative materials, there's that.
Max Steel. So I know Clenergy's got the Runner range, or the Runner brand now, and they're using Max Steel. So I think cost is one part of it, but also the corrosion resistance and a few other things. So to answer Karl's question, there are other materials that are being considered.
In terms of racking, the cost that people pay for racking is basically what the aluminium is worth. There's very little in it outside the cost of the aluminium and maintaining the tooling dies and running a logistics network. That's the cost. So if your input cost goes up by 66%, I'd say it's a fair bet that the cost of racking out the other side is going to be about 66% more. And that's before we've shifted it anywhere. So, of course, without trucks, Australia stops, and the cost of shifting anything anywhere has gone up at least 25, sometimes even 30% with fuel levies. It's quite feasible that the aluminium rail racking bits and pieces will go up by 100%.
Just touching back on fuel increases, it's not only, I've got 8 diesel trucks on the road, and my fuel has gone up, obviously, by the cost of fuel. So a couple $1,000 a month. But not only that, it's now we've seen an increase in plant hire, crane hire, scissor lift hire, things I use every day. We've got a 53-foot diesel scissor lift on site for 6 or 7 weeks for these commercial projects, and they've just put their prices up by 20%. All these things are sort of pre-quoted as well. Like, I've quoted an allowance for scissor lift 3 months ago when we priced the job, and now it's gone up by 20%. So it's just a little, unless the retailer is willing to meet it or the end user, then that's another cost we just have to wear.
So it just eats into your profit, effectively, all these different cost increases.
Exactly. And mainly when I tender, so my personal Taylor Energy sales and commercial is mainly in construction. So we'll sell like a 99 kilowatt off-the-shelf package to a big warehouse that needs it to meet their Green Star rating. That's sort of my key business. That's where I make my most money. And I'm quoting these jobs 9 months in advance. So I'm having to speak to all my wholesalers and just get some fairy pie in the sky number on not even what cost of panel, but what panel class are we going to be up to? Like I'm quoting 540 watt panels now because that's my best guess of where we're going to be up to in 6 months sort of thing. And I'm basically having to guess where I think the cost is going to be by speaking to the wholesalers, and it's a long way in advance to be quoting something, and it just seems like everything's just going up and up and up and up. So it does get a bit worrying and stressful that you're going to get to the job in 6 months and be doing it for free.
Yep.
Yeah, James, you can always put stuff in your contracts that says, based on a base reference price of these things, and I really do believe in being open and transparent, and I'm happy to share what we pay for things. I think that we make a very reasonable, if not unreasonably low margin that It's not like there's anything to hide. Hey, we're making 1 cent a watt here, or actually we're making a 3 cents a watt loss here. I'm happy to tell people that. In fact, in the market at the moment, particularly in 60 cells, we've got hundreds of megawatts in the market that has no buyers. And a little birdie who carries freight for most of the industry tells me last week that a manufacturer approaches him and says, look, I've got 60 containers on a boat that I expected would be sold, but they're not. And I need somewhere to put them. Housing 60 containers of panels, that just doesn't fit into the backyard. That's a shitload of stock.
But that impacts on the cost too, because as soon as it goes into 3PL, it's de-stuff rates, it's per pallet per week rates, then the handling rates back out of there. And that probably equates to an extra, depending how long it's there, per month, it's probably worth half a cent to a cent a watt.
I think our overflow stock's around $7 or $8 a pallet a week. Yeah, that turns into a lot of money if you can't move it for 5 months at a time.
When you say that you've got sort of dead stock, is that because it's been left behind in terms of panel class?
It's supply and demand. It's not like all of the manufacturers get together and say, we forecast Australia to do this volume for January, this volume for Feb, this volume for that time. They're all looking at how much market share they want to get. They set stretch targets. And there's outside influences as well. Let's say there's a utility project in another country that gets cancelled, then the management of that company might turn around and say, we need to move these panels into alternative markets. We're going to cut price. We're going to dump extra stock. So there's no collusion there to say we're going to put enough stock in the market to maintain prices, to maintain decent product volumes in the market so that everything goes along nicely. Everyone's running their own race, and you end up in situations where they miss the mark on the low side and there's a squeeze and the pricing pushes upwards. But when the supply-demand equation goes in the other direction, where they all get very bullish, which we saw in Q1 this year, and they're not working together. They're working independently, saying, we've seen what happened in Q4. There's huge demand because of the squeeze, and what we're being told by the importers and the market is we need heaps more stock into the country. If you get a handful of manufacturers that say, right, push the button, we're going to increase 30% on what we have forecast for the Australian market, and they all do that, then you end up with an excess of stock.
I don't even know that that's what happened, Luke. So at the end of the day, there's a significant portion of those manufacturers that you speak of that aren't storing panel in Australia. They're supplying to order. So you've got a whole heap of really experienced guys that have been doing this for 10 years in the wholesale space. Yeah, everyone's sticking their hand up and saying, hey, we got this wrong. So we started out, January for Victoria at least, we blamed COVID. We were having 35,000 new cases a day. And by late January, we'd had 500,000 cases in Victoria. So when I spoke to customers, it was can't install, crew's got COVID, we've got COVID, customers have got COVID. So that was the rationale behind January. But it didn't pick up in February. Certainly barely picked up in March. I'm thinking March actually wasn't that much better than January or February. So I'm kind of stumped as to what has really stopped the market.
So ultimately, our market has been driven by customers who are willing to pay for systems.
Yeah.
Be it residential, commercial. The question is, why are they buying less?
So maybe the flooding and the other horrific things that happened in January, COVID. I know I had guys off. The rules were basically, you're a close contact, you got a week off. Your mates had this, you're a week off. So my guys are just, week off here. There was times when I had 3 staff on board and I had 100 kilowatt booked for that week. I'll usually pump out 100 kilowatt in a week and I've got 3 guys to do it. Yep. And that just, it just pushes everything back, throws the whole schedule out. I'm already booked till September, basically.
Yep.
Like in commercial space, because that's how far ahead it's all quoted and booked. And now it's just the whole schedule's just stuffed.
Admin can work remotely, but if you don't have guys putting panels on roofs, that's a huge problem, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I can work from home. I can sit at home and do this. I don't have to see anyone ever if I don't want to. I personally enjoy being in the office, though, because as I mentioned earlier, we've got good culture. I like seeing the guys. I like talking to people. That's just me personally. But exactly, if you can't have guys physically out installing the work and getting it through, it's just, everything just gets destroyed. And it has a knock-on effect of like unhappy customers, unhappy clients. They're like, oh yeah, we understand, but they don't actually. And I was going to say earlier when Karl brought up that I can write into my contract that prices are based on this, prices are based on this, they're subject to change, that kind of thing. But when you go to a CIP construction or one of these big commercial builders and say, oh, actually my price has gone up 20 grand, they say, well, we'll find someone to do it at the 70 grand that you quoted your 100 kilowatt at.
Yep.
There's a lot less, oh, we can see that the market's changed, we'll pay you an extra 20 grand now. These big commercial builders work on tight margins. And if you are going to try and say, my diesel price has gone up, my aluminium price has gone up. No, mate, you quoted 70 grand for 100 kilowatt, you smash it in for 70 grand, or we'll find someone else who will, and we won't use you again. That's basically the end of the deal for me.
Yep.
So I have to be pretty good with my guesses of where prices are going to be.
You have to guess very well or predict very well, and also cop some on the chin, I suppose.
Yeah, well, that's it. And the start of this year was a lot of copping on the chin, I tell you. I quoted a lot of stuff back in the 35 cents per watt days that ended up being sold and installed in January or December last year. And I'm like, oh, great. Now it's 50 cents a watt for the same panel. Yep. This is that wine that the Solar Cutters membership gives you a discount with.
Okay.
So with your Solar Cutters membership, you get a discount and free postage or something. And here it is.
Audi special. Here we come.
$2.20 a bottle, mate.
It's one thing that I do well in my business. I have a really good work-life balance. I do school pickup.
How do you maintain that then? What's the secret to maintaining that?
I don't know. Someone did a big post about this on one of the solar pages the other day, and I wrote a big reply on sort of how I've got to that point. Like 2 years ago, I was a bit of a mess, to be fair. I went through a divorce about 3 years ago. Sort of I've got a 50-50 arrangement with my daughter, which is good. It's the one thing that's a blessing, but it sort of made me, all of that sort of made me think, I've got to sort this work-life balance out, because first couple of years of business, I was working till midnight every night. Like I do 10 hours on the tools. I do work till midnight doing all the bookkeeping, that kind of thing. And then it sort of got to the point where I was like, you know what? I want to see my daughter. I've got a 50-50 and I want to use, all that 50-50 that I can. So I got a business coach. He implemented a lot of systems and processes into the business in like how to, just basically how a management tree works properly, explaining roles, what people need to do their roles and how a proper process work and that kind of thing. Lots of just little simple advice tips and a lot of perspective stuff. So I put on a full-time office manager. I promoted Dan to an operations manager role, put him on a salary. So he basically takes care of all the staff. So he tells them where to be, deals with their phone calls, all that crap throughout the day. My office manager is amazing. She does all the bookkeeping, just everything basically. She does everything I need. And I basically just do tenders. So I'm tendering the work. I do site inspections. I go out and see clients, that kind of thing. But I don't, I have no sort of real set hours, and I'll always set any meetings I have, I'll set them between school time. I try and do school pickup and drop off every time I can. I don't work weekends.
Yep.
But it comes back to having good staff and looking after your staff, basically.
And the benefit for you is being able to be a good dad, have that quality time.
It's something that clicked about 2 years ago for me. It's basically like, you know what? Like, I only get her 50% of the time as it is. I want to see her for that 50%.
And what's the improvement to you personally then? Since you implemented all that, you freed up the time.
Yeah, I met a new partner about a year ago too that I'm just really happy with. She's been great for me. She's got a 5-year-old boy that's 10 days apart in age with my daughter, and we're all happy family now. It's all just worked out really nicely. If anyone saw me at any of those solar events a couple of years ago, I was pretty loose, and I've sort of put a few things in perspective and put a lot of time into the business and making it run a lot more independently now without me being on top of every decision. Sort of, it's just about stepping back a little bit and just everyone knowing their roles.
Yeah, sounds good. Once you've got those building blocks in place, it makes it easy to do things like family holidays and so on that were just impossible when you were putting in so many hours. You just can't walk away at that point because there's so much that you're normally doing that other people aren't doing. So I reckon there's a big gain there that you haven't come across yet.
I don't worry about the business like I used to. I used to be on a family holiday, even in Europe or overseas, anywhere, and my phone would just ring all the time and I'd answer it. Day or night, I'd answer it because I had to deal with the problem. I was the only person who could deal with the problem. Whereas now I wouldn't even take my phone over there. I'd leave it switched off. I'd check my emails once every 2 days and just, I'd just say, if there's an operations problem, call Dan. If it's an office admin problem, call Nikita. If not, if you're on a particular site, talk to the foreman, talk to my leading hand. I'll deal with it when I get back. Now I'm really confident in our abilities. We do a really good job. Things aren't going wrong on site. Everything's quality focused. We do so much quality control. We do so much training. Every table tray is perfectly neat everywhere. Everything's done properly. Like that sort of thing makes you comfortable as well. It helps you sleep at night. There's not going to be a roof fire or anything like that when you go to bed. You don't have to worry.
So in the ABC this week, there was a defence expert saying that foreign oil dependency is a massive vulnerability for the Australian economy. He said that a push towards EVs, green hydrogen and other alternative energy would help with our national security. Karl, you've done your part and bought your Tesla, which you're waiting on. James, you just bought a Tesla?
Yeah. I ordered one last week. Very excited, but mine's a 6 to 9 month wait.
There's some sacrifices to be made. I've certainly mathed out the running costs as being a significant winner over any kind of petrol car. But on the same token, even if you have an existing car that you're trading in, there's still some money to be borrowed if you don't have cash in the bank, or there's money to be borrowed out of your mortgage. One way, shape or form, you've still got to pay for it. I get it. Not everyone can afford a new Tesla, but lots of new electric cars hitting the market. I encourage everybody to have a look at new cars coming to market in Australia. There's a whole list of them. Rivian's there. So everyone says, I need a ute. And I don't know how many people have had a look at the specs of a Rivian, but it makes 800 horsepower. So
8-ton towing, 0 to 100 in 3 seconds.
I think that'd be the end of the Hilux.
I don't think you're letting the apprentice drive it to site.
I don't know. I don't know. I think that give it another 5 years, it's going to be common. You're just not going to be able to buy a petrol car, and every electric car is going to have at least 400 horsepower.
BYD are doing a ute in 2023, I saw, which is pretty exciting. Like BYD seem to be a leader in the industry. I mean, they've been making buses for a long time. That BYD Han that we all saw down at Smart Energy Conference last year was pretty impressive.
I think they call the Han the Chinese Tesla killer. And that's another one that you can get in all-wheel drive, 90, 100 kilowatt hour battery, 0 to 100, sub 4 seconds. The future looks fast.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very excited to have mine, and I'm very excited as a business to get into EV charging as well. It's something I'm really passionate about and I really want to be doing. I want to be one of the first on the floor to be really pumping out EV chargers as part of the solar systems, especially on commercial. Like when we're building these massive tilt slab offices, I'm like, why aren't we having 20 EV chargers in the car park while we're here? While we're building, put a conduit to every car park, and we'll put an EV charger at every car park as well while we're here. And I'm pushing hard for it. I'm getting nowhere, but I'm trying.
Makes perfect sense. I mean, it might be a tough push now, but I suspect in 2 to 3 years' time, it's going to be a standard for new commercial site. So James Taylor from Taylor Energy, thanks for coming online today, mate. Really appreciate the chat. It's been really good.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was nice to have a chat and nice to have a glass of wine and a beer and talk to some like-minded individuals.
Cheers.
Mate, you've done really well. We try and make it a casual affair conversation type of thing, and you've made it pretty easy for us. It's easy to have a chat with you. You've done really well. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. I hope you got something good out of it. Please like, share, follow, send it to someone who might get some benefit out of it. And yeah, thanks for listening again.